The air inside the submarine I-41 was thick, a familiar cocktail of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the faint metallic tang of recycled oxygen. For weeks, this had been their world, a cramped steel tube suspended between the crushing pressure of the deep and a sky filled with enemies. It was November 17th, 1944. The waters northeast of Truk Lagoon, once an impenetrable fortress for the Imperial Japanese Navy, were now a hunting ground where they had become the prey. Lieutenant Commander Norio Ishikawa pressed his face against the cold rubber eyepiece of the attack periscope. The sweat from his brow misted the lens for a moment before he wiped it away with the back of his glove. In the shimmering circle of daylight, his target moved with an almost arrogant placidity, an American escort carrier, a flat-topped vessel, its deck empty, steaming placidly across calm seas, a prize of immense value. Ishikawa was a veteran, a product of the rigorous Imperial Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima. He had been taught that submarines were the modern samurai's weapon, a single precise strike from the shadows to cripple a mightier foe. His vessel, the I-41, was a testament to that philosophy. She was a Type B-1 submarine, a titan of the deep, designed not merely for ambush, but as a strategic asset. Her long hull once housed a hangar and catapult for a Yokosuka E-14Y floatplane, an eye in the sky that could scout ahead of the fleet. But now, in the autumn of 1944, the floatplane hangar was a hollow metal tomb for a dead strategy. Japan's fleets were scattered and broken. There was nothing left to scout for. The I-41's mission, like that of every remaining Japanese submarine, had been reduced to a desperate, singular purpose: sink American ships. Any American ships. His executive officer, Lieutenant Tanaka, stood beside him, his face a mask of disciplined tension. "Course and speed are steady, Commander. She shows no sign of awareness." Ishikawa grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving the lens. The firing solution was taking shape in his mind, a complex equation of angles, speeds, and distances he could solve in his sleep. Target speed, 16 knots. Range, 3,000 yards in closing. A perfect setup. Yet a cold knot of unease tightened in his stomach. This was too perfect. The Pacific in late 1944 was not a place for lone carriers. American doctrine, as ruthless as it was effective, dictated that high-value assets like carriers never traveled alone. They were the queens on the oceanic chessboard, protected by a phalanx of destroyers and destroyer escorts, fast, aggressive ships bristling with sonar and depth charges. Where were the escorts? His lookouts had swept the horizon until their eyes burned. Nothing. The sea was empty. The sky, save for a single distant speck that could have been a seagull, was clear. "It could be a straggler," Tanaka whispered, voicing the hope that flickered in every man's heart. It was possible. But Ishikawa's training screamed a different word: bait. What Ishikawa could not see, what no periscope could ever reveal, was the full lethal reality of his situation. Far above, circling at 10,000 feet and hidden in the sun's glare, were two TBF Avengers. They were the predatory eyes of the trap. Their pilots weren't scanning the ocean with binoculars. They were monitoring the dull green glow of their ASV radar screens, instruments sensitive enough to pick up the brief metallic glint of a periscope breaking the surface. The carrier below, the USS Anzio, was not a wounded straggler. She was the hardened, beating heart of Task Group 30.7, a specialized American unit known as a hunter-kill group. Perfected in the brutal Battle of the Atlantic against German U-boats, this tactic had been refined into a deadly art form. The escort carrier acted as both bait and a mobile airfield, while its protectors, the killers, lurked just over the electronic and visual horizon.
15 miles to the east, 4 destroyer escorts, including the USS Lawrence C. Taylor, steamed in a loose screen. Their sonar operators were on high alert, their depth charge racks fully loaded, listening. They were the teeth of the trap, waiting for the signal to close. The entire group was a perfectly coordinated organism of destruction, designed for one purpose: to lure a submarine into making the exact mistake Ishikawa was about to make. Inside the I-41's control room, the silence was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of the gyros and the soft hiss of the ventilation. Every man waited for the commander's decision. Ishikawa wrestled with his instincts. His gut warned him of danger, of an unseen enemy, but the pressure from high command was immense. The war was being lost. The Philippines were falling. Every commander was expected to take risks, to strike bold blows for the emperor. To retreat from such a perfect target without firing a shot would be seen as cowardice. The potential glory of sinking an American carrier, of giving Japan a desperately needed victory, was a powerful intoxicant. He saw not a trap, but a chance, a final glorious chance to change their fate. He lowered the periscope with a decisive snap. The image of the carrier was burned into his mind. Final bearing, mark. Prepared tubes 1 through 4 for a full spread. His voice was calm, betraying none of the internal conflict. The torpedo officer repeated the commands, his own voice steady. Throughout the boat, men moved with quiet efficiency, their actions honed by endless drills. Tubes 1 through 4 ready, Commander. Ishikawa took a deep breath, the stale air feeling heavy in his lungs. He was a hunter, and the prey was in his sights. He could not know that he was the one being hunted. The metallic clang of the outer torpedo tube doors opening was the sound of the trap being sprung. In 45 seconds, everything he and his crew understood about submarine warfare would become tragically, fatally obsolete. His torpedoes would miss, but something else would find him, something that hunted submarines the way submarines hunted ships. Back in the sterile, paper-filled offices of Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, the concept of what was about to happen to the I-401 was quite literally unthinkable. For months, troubling, fragmented reports had been trickling in from the front lines. They spoke of submarines that had successfully crash-dived, escaping the immediate threat of bombs and depth charges, only to be destroyed minutes later by a single mysterious explosion from the depths. The few survivors, rare as they were, told bewildering stories of hearing the faint, high-pitched sound of a lone torpedo circling them, a mechanical predator stalking them in the dark before its final, fatal rush. These reports were met with skepticism, even dismissal by the senior naval architects and strategists. The conclusions were always the same: exaggeration, battlefield stress, or clever American propaganda designed to sow fear. Their reasoning was grounded in the known laws of physics and engineering. A torpedo was a dumb weapon. It was aimed, fired, and ran in a straight line. Creating a miniaturized guidance system that could distinguish a submarine's propeller noise from the torpedo's own motor, the ambient sounds of the ocean, and the cacophony of a naval engagement, all while surviving a violent drop from an aircraft, seemed a challenge of insurmountable complexity.
The Japanese, with their own considerable engineering prowess, had not developed such a weapon. They therefore assumed the Americans had not either. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination. But across the Pacific, in the quiet academic halls of Harvard University and the cutting-edge laboratories of Bell Telephone, this impossibility had been made real. The project was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war, a weapon whose existence was classified at a level comparable to the Manhattan Project. To maintain this secrecy, it was given an intentionally mundane and misleading name, the Mark 24 mine. But to the handful of scientists and pilots who knew its true nature, it had a simple, almost affectionate nickname, Fido. Like a loyal dog, you could let it off the leash and it would go hunt, find its target, and never come back. Fido was a technological revolution born from a simple, elegant idea. The German Navy had its own acoustic torpedo, the G7ES Zaunkönig, designed to be fired from U-boats to hunt the noisy destroyers that pursued them. But the Zaunkönig was a different beast entirely. It was fast, active, and designed for a different purpose. Fido was its philosophical opposite, and in its design lay its genius. Its most brilliant feature was its deliberate slowness. While a conventional torpedo screamed through the water at over 40 knots, Fido moved at just 12 knots, barely faster than a man could sprint. This was not a weakness, it was the key to its lethality. At this leisurely pace, its small electric motor produced minimal sound, preventing the torpedo from deafening itself. This allowed its 4 sensitive crystal hydrophones, mounted in its nose, to do their work. Fido was a passive listener. It did not send out an active sonar ping that would betray its presence. It simply eavesdropped on the underwater world, listening for one very specific sound. The sound it hunted was the 24 kilohertz signature of propeller cavitation. As a submarine's propellers spun rapidly, they created pockets of vacuum in the water, tiny bubbles that would collapse with a distinct high-frequency hiss. To Fido's electronic brain, this sound was a beacon. It was the unique acoustic fingerprint of its prey. Upon hitting the water, a small parachute detaching, a seawater-activated battery would hum to life, powering up its systems. For the first few seconds, it ran straight to clear the turbulence of its own entry. Then its guidance system took over. If it heard nothing, it would begin a slow, circular search pattern, spiraling outwards, patiently listening. The moment its hydrophones picked up the telltale hiss of a submarine's propellers, the simple analog computer inside would make a decision. Is the sound louder on the port or starboard hydrophones? The rudder would adjust accordingly. The torpedo would turn, its nose locked on the source of the sound, and begin its pursuit with a mechanical patience that never tired, never lost concentration, and never gave up. It was the perfect predator for the abyss, a weapon that turned the ocean itself, the very medium that gave a submarine its stealth and protection, into a death trap with no escape.
With a mind cleared by the cold calculus of combat, Commander Ishikawa gave the order, his voice cutting through the tension in the control room like a blade. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. The submarine shuddered 4 times as compressed air violently expelled nearly 7 tons of steel and high explosives from its forward tubes. 4 Type 95 torpedoes, the pride of the Imperial Navy, were now racing through the water, their oxygen-fueled engines leaving almost no visible wake. They were deadly fish on a 90-second run to their target. Through the periscope, Ishikawa watched the American carrier steam onward, blissfully unaware of the doom closing in at 49 knots. The entire crew held a collective breath, counting the seconds in their heads. 88, 89, 90. Silence. 90 seconds stretched into 2 minutes, then 3, The only sound was the gentle hum of I-41's electric motors. There were no columns of water, no blossoms of fire and smoke on the horizon. The torpedoes had either malfunctioned or, more likely, the American captain had made a minor, last-minute course correction that had been enough. A clean miss. The weight of failure settled heavily in the control room. "Lower periscope," Ishikawa ordered, his voice flat with disappointment. The immediate priority was escape. The torpedo wakes, faint as they were, still pointed back to their position like 4 ghostly arrows. Prepare to change course and go deep. He never finished the command. The voice of the lookout, sharp with terror, crackled through the intercom, a sound that turned every submariner's blood to ice. "Aircraft, bearing 270, diving on us, range closing rapidly." High above, in the vibrating cockpit of his TBF Avenger, Lieutenant James McCarthy grinned. He hadn't needed to spot the periscope. The moment I-41 launched its attack, the disturbance created by the torpedoes leaving their tubes registered clearly on his ASV radar screen. They were faint, fleeting lines, but they were all he needed. "Tally-ho," he spoke calmly into his throat mic. "Fish in the water. Hunter is commencing attack run." He pushed the throttle forward and the massive right cyclone engine roared, pulling the Avenger into a steep, merciless dive. The placid blue ocean rushed up to meet them. His radio man in the turret, Robert Chain, flipped a series of switches, arming the Mark 24 torpedo nestled in the bomb bay. They had a window of opportunity, a tiny slice of time. An experienced Japanese crew could take their submarine from surface vulnerability to the relative safety of the depths in under a minute. They had perhaps 45 seconds. Below, chaos erupted. "Dive! Dive! All ahead full! Take her to 90 meters!" Ishikawa's commands were instantaneous. The klaxon horn blared through I-41's compartments, a jarring shriek that sent every man scrambling to his dive station. The roar of seawater flooding the main ballast tanks was deafening, a controlled cataclysm that pulled the massive submarine under. The deck tilted to a terrifying angle, and men braced themselves against bulkheads as the I-41 angled sharply toward the dark, crushing embrace of the depths that promised salvation. The depth gauge needle spun wildly. 30 meters, 40 meters, 50 meters. They were going to make it. But time was a luxury they did not have. McCarthy's Avenger screamed over the target area just 30 seconds after the I-41's conning tower had vanished beneath the surface. Below him was a swirling patch of disturbed water, a swirl marking the submarine's grave, if he was fast enough. He leveled out at 150 feet, the ocean spray nearly misting his canopy, and toggled the release. With a solid thump, Fido dropped cleanly from the bomb bay, its small drogue parachute steadying its descent. It splashed into the sea 400 yards from where the submarine had disappeared.
Aboard the I-401, as the boat leveled off at 80 meters, a tense quiet returned. The roar of the dive was replaced by the low hum of the motors. They had done it. They had escaped. Ishikawa was already planning their silent, deep withdrawal. And then the hydrophone operator tore off his headphones, his face pale. "Commander, propeller screws in the water." "Report," Ishikawa snapped. "Is it a destroyer?" "No, sir," the operator stammered, his voice trembling. "It sounds like a torpedo." Confusion rippled through the control room. They had fired the torpedoes, unless another submarine was attacking, which was impossible. "It is an enemy torpedo, sir," the operator insisted, his voice rising in panic. "Approaching from astern. It's following us. Bearing is constant. Range 800 meters and closing. It is tracking our every move." For the first time in his decorated career, Norio Ishikawa felt a wave of pure, primal terror. The rumors were true. A weapon that hunted, And that instant he knew they were not fighting a ship or a plane, they were fighting a ghost. All stop, rig for silent running. It was a desperate gambit. If the torpedo hunted by sound, then perhaps absolute silence would make them invisible. The electric motors whined to a halt. The submarine glided forward on its momentum, now a silent metal coffin. Every man stood frozen, holding his breath, listening. The operator whispered into his mic. Screws fading. Range increasing. It's lost us. A collective inaudible sigh of relief swept through the boat. It had worked. But their relief was brutally short-lived. The operator's voice returned, now edged with utter despair. It's coming back. Screws increasing again. It's circling, searching. It's found us again. Fido was executing its programming perfectly. Having lost the propeller noise, it had entered its spiral search pattern. For nearly a minute, it heard nothing but the ambient groan of the ocean. Then, its sensitive hydrophones picked up a new set of sounds. The faint creaking of I-401's pressure hull adjusting to the immense depth. The whisper of water flowing over its stationary form. It was enough. Fido turned towards the sound and resumed its patient, deadly pursuit. Ishikawa knew he was out of options. Silence had failed. All ahead full, right full rudder. Take her to 120 meters, he roared, choosing action over a silent death. The submarine lurched forward as her motor screamed back to life, providing a clear, loud beacon for the weapon. I-401 heeled over, diving deeper in a frantic corkscrewing evasion. But it was futile. The sonar operator's reports became a continuous, chilling countdown. Torpedo is matching our turn. Range 400 meters. Range 300 meters. It's gaining. Range 200. The torpedo was twice as fast. The mathematics were inescapable. The high-pitched whine of Fido's electric motor was now so close it could be heard faintly through the hull itself, a rising shriek that seemed to drill into the very souls of the men inside. The operator gave one last desperate shout, his voice cracking. Brace for impact.
The Mark 24's proximity fuse detected the massive steel hull of the I-41 at a range of 15 feet. It didn't need to make physical contact. The detonator fired, and 92 pounds of Torpex, an explosive mixture 60% more powerful than TNT, erupted against the submarine's port side, just aft of the conning tower. The blast didn't just punch a hole. It created a titanic hydraulic shock wave that traveled through the water and struck the hull like a colossal sledgehammer. The pressure hull, designed to withstand the steady crush of the ocean, was not built for such a sudden, focused blow. It buckled, tore, and disintegrated over an 8-foot section. The ocean, held at bay for so long, burst in with unimaginable fury. 3 compartments flooded in less than a second. The force of the explosion and the violent inrush of water was so immense that it snapped the submarine's keel. The I-41, a formidable warship moments before, broke in 2, her back broken. She went from a functioning vessel to a sinking wreck in the blink of an eye. For Lieutenant Commander Ishikawa and the 47 men in the control room and central sections, death was instantaneous and absolute. They were crushed and drowned before they could even comprehend what had happened. In the forward section, a handful of men found themselves trapped in a rapidly flooding steel coffin. The screams of twisting metal and rushing water were their only eulogy. In a testament to human will, 3 men from the aft compartments managed to reach their escape lungs and began a desperate, near impossible ascent from over 300 feet below. 2 reached the surface, only to die in agony from the bends. A single man, Petty Officer Second Class Toshihiro Yamamoto, miraculously survived. He was plucked from the indifferent sea by the destroyer escort USS Lawrence C. Taylor, one of the killers from the hunter-killer group. Dazed, hypothermic, and in shock, he would become one of only a tiny handful of Japanese submariners to be captured alive after their boat was sunk during the entire war. His subsequent interrogation by Allied intelligence officers would provide the final, chilling confirmation of what they already suspected. The Japanese had no defense and no real understanding of the weapon that was systematically eradicating their submarine force. The destruction of the I-41 was far more than the loss of a single submarine and its crew. It was a stark symbol of a technological and tactical revolution that had completely inverted the nature of undersea warfare. In the 16 months since Fido had been introduced to the Pacific theater, these unassuming, slow-moving torpedoes had sunk or critically damaged 37 Japanese submarines. This represented nearly a third of all Japanese submarine losses during that period. A single secret weapon had achieved a kill rate that dwarfed almost any other system. The psychological impact on the Japanese submarine crews was even more devastating than the physical losses. The very element that had been their greatest ally, the deep, dark, concealing ocean, had been turned against them. The depths were no longer a sanctuary, they were a hunting ground, where invisible, implacable weapons stalked them. Morale, once sky-high among the elite sailors of the submarine service, plummeted. Experienced crews, who once felt the sense of security after a successful crash dive, now understood that the dive was merely the beginning of a new kind of terror. The 45 seconds it took to get under was no longer a race to safety, but a desperate flight from one predator into the jaws of another. Volunteers for submarine duty, once plentiful, became scarce. The Imperial Navy's submarine force, which had begun the war with an aggressive doctrine focused on hunting American battleships and carriers, was forced into a state of tactical paralysis. Commanders were ordered to avoid risks, to surface only when necessary, to patrol with extreme caution. They ended the war cowering beneath the waves, their effectiveness reduced to almost zero, yet still suffering steady, inexplicable attrition. Fido didn't just sink submarines, it sunk a philosophy. The age of the submarine as the apex predator of the sea, a lone wolf that could bring down the mightiest of warships, was over. The hunter had definitively and terrifyingly become the hunted. The patient listening torpedo, born in the quiet labs of American universities, had done more than just help win battles. It had silenced an entire arm of the Imperial Japanese Navy, accelerating Japan's inexorable march toward defeat and heralding a new and even more deadly era of undersea warfare.